The sound of the spoon hitting the floor came before the pain. A sharp metallic ring that cut through the quiet of my kitchen. For a second, I thought the noise came from the radio, until the room began to tilt. The walls drifted backward, the air grew heavy, and I felt my heartbeat stumble like a skipped record. I tried to reach the counter, but the tiles rushed up faster than my hand could find them. When I woke, the world had shrunk to a white ceiling and the soft pulse of machines. I couldn't move at first. Only the smell of antiseptic told me I was alive. Then came the weight of the tube in my arm, the faint echo of voices in the hallway, and the sound of my own breathing, shallow and foreign. A nurse appeared beside me. Her face floated in and out of focus, kind eyes framed by exhaustion. "Mrs. Beck, can you hear me?" I blinked, and that was all I could manage. My mouth was too dry for words. "Don't try to speak yet," she said gently. "You had a cardiac episode. We almost lost you twice." The words drifted through me like cold water. Twice. She looked at the chart and frowned. "We'll call your emergency contact. That's your son, Ethan Beck?" I wanted to smile at the sound of his name. "Yes," I whispered. "Please call him." When she left, the silence pressed against me like a second blanket. Through the thin walls, I could hear her making the call. Her voice was soft but firm, the tone people use when they're asking for urgency without panic. "Mr. Beck, this is Nurse Jennifer at Street Luke's. Your mother suffered a severe cardiac event. It's serious. The doctors aren't sure she'll make it through the night." My heart monitor began to beep faster. I waited for his voice, that familiar warmth that used to say, "It's okay, Mom. I'm here." But what I heard instead was calm and cold. "Look, I'm at my product launch dinner. We've worked on this for months. Can this wait? If she's that bad, call me in the morning. If she's gone, she's gone." There was a pause. Then the line went silent. I felt something crack, not in my chest this time, but somewhere quieter, deeper. The kind of break you can't see on an X-ray. The nurse came back a few minutes later. She avoided my eyes when she spoke. "Your son said he's unable to come tonight. He asked us to call in the morning." "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "He's busy." She touched my hand. "Sometimes the ones who should care most surprise us the worst. But you'll get through this. You're strong." When she left, I stared at the clock above the door, its red second hand slicing the night into tiny, merciless pieces. I imagined Ethan at some glittering restaurant, raising a glass, surrounded by people who looked at him with admiration. He probably told a story about growing up with a single mom who gave everything for him. That part was true, except the ending he told himself. Because he didn't grow up grateful. He grew up entitled. I had raised him to never feel small the way I once did. To believe that doors opened for him, that he could take up space without apology. I gave him that confidence, and somewhere along the way, he learned that my love was limitless, that it could be stretched, tested, taken for granted, and it would never break. Until, tonight, the machines hummed beside me, steady and indifferent. I thought about the years, the late nights grading papers so I could afford his private school, the second job I took to cover his college tuition, the mortgage I refinanced to help him start his company. I thought about the nights I stayed awake waiting for his calls, worrying about his stress, telling myself that exhaustion was just another name for motherhood. And now, lying in this bed under fluorescent light, I finally asked myself a question I had never dared to think before. What would happen if I stopped saving him? The idea scared me more than the heart attack, because I had built my entire existence around keeping Ethan safe, successful, unscathed. Who would I be if I stopped? Somewhere in the hallway, a patient laughed. The sound was strange and bright, like a bird that had found a way out. I closed my eyes and imagined what it would feel like to breathe without the weight of obligation. To wake up and think about myself first. The thought felt like sin and freedom. I didn't sleep that night. I lay still, watching the shadows crawl across the ceiling. I wasn't angry yet. Anger requires energy, and I didn't have much left. But beneath the exhaustion, something was shifting. A tiny ember in the ashes of my patience. At dawn, the nurse came back. "How are you feeling?" "Alive," I said, surprising both of us. She smiled. "That's a good start." When she left, I turned my head toward the window. The city was waking up. Cars, sirens, light the world going on as if nothing had changed. but inside me, everything had. I realized then that I had crossed a line. The woman I had been the one who would have forgiven, explained, waited was gone. The one who remained had no room left for illusion. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel weak. I felt awake. The morning light spilled through the blinds, like a slow confession. The nurse came in with a clipboard and told me the doctor would discharge me in 2 days if my heart stayed steady. She smiled, expecting relief, but all I felt was emptiness. I was still here, still breathing, but something inside me had shifted so far I wasn't sure what remained. When she left, I turned my head toward the window. The city below was already moving, cars, people, color, sound, life continuing with its usual cruelty, unaware that someone up here had just learned how fragile love could be. Ethan didn't call. Not that morning, not the next. The nurses brought me meals I couldn't taste, and flowers that weren't for me. Every hour I listened for the phone, but it stayed silent. On the 3rd day, a card arrived, a generic one from the hospital gift shop, the kind that says, "Get well soon" in silver script above a bouquet of printed daisies. At the bottom, a single word, Ethan. No love, no mom, just his name. I laughed when I saw it, but it wasn't joy. It was the sound you make when disbelief finally runs out of places to hide. That night, I couldn't sleep. My heart wasn't the problem anymore. It was my mind. I lay in the dark counting memories instead of sheep. His first birthday, the night I sat beside his bed through a fever, the day he graduated and didn't look back at me in the crowd. I remembered the endless hours spent holding him up while he climbed the world, and the years he forgot I was the one standing underneath. When dawn came, I made a decision. It was the first real decision that had belonged only to me in a very long time. By the time the doctor came in to check my chart, I was sitting upright, dressed, waiting. He smiled when he saw me. "You look ready to go home." "I am," I said. "More than you think." 2 days later, I walked out of the hospital under my own power. The air felt sharp and alive, like the first breath after a storm. I took a cab home and stared out the window the whole way, watching the city slide past in silver streaks. People with coffee cups and phones and urgency. They didn't know it, but I was one of them again. I wasn't the mother waiting for her son's call. I was a woman with unfinished business. When the driver dropped me off, I stood in front of my house for a long time. It looked smaller than I remembered. The white paint had started to fade, the roses had wilted, but the wind chime on the porch still sang the same thin song. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The silence was heavy, but it was mine. I showered, dressed in my favorite black suit, the one I used to wear to parent-teacher conferences years ago. It still fit. My hair was silver now, but it caught the light the same way it used to when Ethan was little and called me pretty. I smiled at the memory, then let it go. The house smelled faintly of lavender and dust. On the table sat the framed photo of us at his graduation. He was smiling, eyes full of ambition, my hand on his shoulder like a promise. I stared at it until the air felt too tight. Then I turned the frame face down. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen counter. Steam curled up from the cup, soft and weightless. For a moment, I imagined Ethan walking through the door, telling me everything was a misunderstanding. But that fantasy lasted less than a breath. The truth was already too loud to ignore. He had chosen a dinner reservation over me, and I had chosen to forgive every cruelty that led him there. I took a deep breath, reached for my phone, and called my bank. "This is Margaret speaking, First National. How can I help you today?" "Margaret, it's Clementine Beck. I need to schedule an emergency meeting with Mr. Patterson." She hesitated. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Beck?" "Everything," I said, "is about to be." We scheduled it for 2 o'clock that afternoon. I hung up, feeling something warm and unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Power. It wasn't the loud, angry kind. It was the quiet certainty of someone who finally understood the cost of her own patience. I spent the rest of the morning gathering papers, bank statements, account details, old receipts. Each page was a chapter in the story of my servitude, each signature a bruise I had politely ignored. When the clock struck 1, I stood in front of the mirror. My reflection looked calm, even graceful, but my eyes were sharp. The nurse had called me strong. She was wrong. Strength was what I had before. This was something else entirely. At precisely 2 o'clock, I walked into First National Bank. The marble floor gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights, and the air smelled of expensive order. James Patterson, my banker for 20 years, greeted me at the door. He had the kind of polite concern people use when they sense something irreversible is about to happen. "Clementine," he said, "I heard about your hospital stay. Are you feeling better?" "I'm feeling awake," I said. He smiled uncertainly and led me to his office. For the next hour, we reviewed my accounts, investments, assets, the full map of a life built around everyone else's needs but my own. I listened carefully, then folded my hands on the desk. "James," I said softly, "I want to make some changes." "What kind of changes?" "All of them." He blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "I want to liquidate everything I own. Every account Ethan has access to, every joint fund. I want them moved to new accounts, under my name only." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Clementine, are you sure you've thought this through?" I smiled. "I've had a week in a hospital bed to think. I've never been more sure." He hesitated. "What about Ethan? What about him?" When I left the bank an hour later, every account that tied me to my son was gone. My phone buzzed 17 times before I reached the parking lot. Each call was from him. I didn't answer any of them. I slid into the back seat of a taxi, looked out the window, and whispered to myself, "You're free." The word felt strange on my tongue, like something borrowed but true. I let it stay there, because for the first time in my life, I was starting to believe it. The next morning felt eerily calm. No phone calls, no voices, just the sound of my kettle whistling in a quiet kitchen that used to echo with someone else's footsteps. For years, my mornings had revolved around Ethan's needs, his business trips, his deadlines, the bank transfers I scheduled before my first cup of tea. Now, the only plan was mine. The house felt different, without the invisible weight of waiting. The sunlight found corners I hadn't noticed in years, dust floating through the air like tiny reminders of everything I had ignored. I made myself breakfast toast, black coffee, and ate slowly, tasting the silence. There was a time when silence frightened me. It used to feel like punishment, the absence of connection. Now it felt like proof that I had survived my own noise. When the dishes were done, I opened the folder I'd brought home from the bank. Papers lay in neat stacks. Account closures, transfer confirmations, my new balance sheet. Each signature felt like a small resurrection. For once, the numbers belonged to me. I thought of Ethan's voice on the phone, that detached calm that had once sounded professional but now sounded cruel. "Call me if she's still alive then." He hadn't meant it to sound like a verdict, but that's exactly what it was. The old Clementine would have justified it. "He's busy, he's under pressure, he didn't understand." The new one had run out of excuses. At noon, the doorbell rang. I didn't move. The sound came again, longer, impatient. I checked the window. Ethan's car. I opened the door just enough to meet his eyes. He looked perfect, as always, tailored suit, expensive watch, the faint scent of cologne that smelled like success. "Mom," he said, smiling too wide. "You look great." I was so worried. "No, you weren't," I said. My voice surprised me, steady, calm, without accusation. He blinked, caught off guard. "Of course I was. You scared me half to death." "You must have a strong heart then," I said. "Yours survived dinner reservations and all." His face flushed. "That's not fair. You don't understand how much pressure I was under that night." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You were under pressure to keep your image spotless. My crisis didn't fit the aesthetic." He stepped inside without waiting for permission. "Why are you doing this, Mom?" the bank called. "They said you closed the accounts. Those were our safety nets." "Our?" I repeated, letting the word linger. "I think you mean yours." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I can explain. I don't want explanations. I want honesty. When was the last time you visited me without needing something?" He didn't answer. His silence was a confession. I gestured toward the chair. "Sit down." He obeyed, reluctantly. I handed him a copy of the bank statement, the new one with his name missing. "You'll need to adjust your expectations," I said. "The money you used to depend on is no longer available." He stared at the paper, like it was written in a foreign language. "You can't do this. I have obligations, Mom. A house, employees, people who rely on me." "So did I." I said quietly. I had a child who relied on me, and I did everything for him. But that child became a man who learned to rely on everyone but himself. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the sound of the nurse's voice, the flat tone of his reply, and the pity turned into clarity. "You'll figure it out," I said. "You're clever. You always have been." I walked to the door and held it open. "Goodbye, Ethan." He hesitated. "Goodbye? What's that supposed to mean?" "It means the part of me that used to save you has retired." He stared at me for a long moment, searching for weakness, for the mother who would eventually cave. When he found none, his expression hardened. "You'll regret this." "I already have," I said. When the door closed behind him, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. The house was silent again, but this time the silence belonged to me. I made another cup of tea and sat by the window. The roses outside had begun to bloom again. I thought of pruning them, how you had to cut away what no longer served the plant so it could grow stronger. That was what I was doing now. Pruning. I took out a notebook and wrote one line across the first page. Phase 2. Take inventory of what's left and what's worth keeping. Then, slowly, I began to list everything I still had. My house, my health, my time, my name. Somewhere near the bottom of the list, I wrote one more thing. My freedom. I underlined it twice. That afternoon, the light shifted across my living room like a slow tide, inching from the bookshelf to the framed photographs to the carpet where the sun warmed a rectangular island of color. I sat in that light and let it cover my hands. They looked different there. Not softer, not harder, just honest. Hands that had cooked and cleaned and signed papers that helped someone else build a kingdom. Hands that were about to build something smaller and truer. I opened the lowest drawer of the sideboard and took out every envelope I had kept out of habit. Bank receipts, credit statements, copies of transfers that had a familiar rhythm. I could almost hum it. Mortgage support, equipment emergency, bridge loan. Each title wore a mask I had helped put on. I lined everything on the table and made 3 stacks. What I had given, what I owed, what I still had. The last pile was thin, but it was mine. The doorbell rang again. Not Ethan this time. A delivery. A florist box with a satin ribbon. The card inside was short. "So sorry for the scare. Rest up." I set the flowers by the sink and watched their petals open under the kitchen light. They were beautiful, and they meant nothing. I carried them to the porch and left them for the wind. Back inside, I brewed tea and opened my laptop. I told myself I was only checking email, but my fingers went where they wanted. I typed Ethan's company name. A polished site appeared. There was a photograph of him on the home page speaking to an audience. The caption said that he believed in building without safety nets. I could not help it. I laughed. The sound echoed off the cabinets and surprised me with its edge. I clicked through images of his team, their offsites, their dinners. I found a picture from a restaurant with white tablecloths and wine glasses that caught the light like prisms. In the corner of the frame, I saw the edge of a sleeve I recognized. Vanessa's velvet green. The timestamp matched the night the nurse had asked him to come. I waited for the burn of anger, but what I felt was not fire. It was distance. I was watching a scene from a life I did not live anymore. I shut the laptop and walked to the garden. The roses had been thirsty while I was gone. I trimmed brown edges and watered them until the ground darkened and sighed. A neighbor waved from the sidewalk and asked if I was feeling better. I told her I was. It was the truth, in a new shape. As the sun lowered, I went room to room and took inventory of what I wanted to keep. The blue bowl my mother gave me. The quilt with the uneven stitches we made one winter when the heat broke. A stack of paperbacks that smelled like summer. I placed them all on a shelf within reach. Then I took down the family portrait that had hung above the mantel for a decade. We looked handsome in it. We also looked like strangers. I wiped the dust line from the wall and leaned the frame behind a chair. The room exhaled. That evening I sat at the kitchen table with a lined notebook and wrote a list with 2 columns. What I cannot control, what I can. I filled the left side in 10 seconds. Ethan's choices, Vanessa's opinions, gossip, reputation, the past. The right side took longer, but it felt like breathing. My schedule, my money, my attention, my home. The words looked simple on the page. They felt like anchors. The phone began to ring again, then again. I put it face down. I was not performing patience anymore. Silence was not a test I had to pass to be seen as good. It was a decision about what I would allow inside my head. I made dinner for one, nothing grand. An egg, 2 tomatoes, bread toasted until it cracked under my teeth. I ate slowly and did not apologize for the pleasure of it. Toward the end of the meal, I felt the shape of grief settle beside me. It did not ask permission. Grief rarely does. It set its elbows on my table and looked me in the eye. I let it stay. There is a kind of grief that belongs to love gone wrong. There is another kind that belongs to the person you were while you let it happen. I was mourning both. After I washed the dishes, I took a small wooden box from the top of the closet. Inside lay the watch that had been my husband's. He wore it when he planted the first rosebush by the fence. He wore it the day Ethan took his first steps. He wore it at the hospital the night the doctor said the word we did not want to learn. I fastened the watch around my wrist and felt the old weight settle against my skin. The second hand moved in tiny, stubborn circles. It reminded me that time is faithful even when people are not. I returned to the table and opened my notebook again. I wrote a sentence and let the ink dry before I looked at it. I will not save what refuses to stand. The line did not feel harsh. It felt clean. It felt like a promise to the part of me that had kept the house warm while neglecting her own fire. The doorbell rang a third time. I turned off the porch light and stood quietly until the footsteps retreated. The envelope they left behind slid under the door with a whisper. I did not pick it up. Not yet. I made chamomile tea and carried it to the window. Outside, the street lamps turned the air the color of honey. I watched a child ride a bicycle in a circle until his father called him in. The front door across the street closed with a gentle click. I let the ordinary comfort me. When the tea was gone, I opened the envelope. A typed apology filled the first page. Words about stress and confusion and the terrible optics of the launch night. On the second page, a solution. If I would reopen the accounts for one more quarter, he would restructure, refinance, restore. The promises were written like contracts, tidy and impressive. At the bottom, his signature stretched across the white space like a confident bridge. I folded the pages once and slid them back inside without signing anything. Then I took a pen and wrote one sentence on the outside of the envelope where he would see it when I returned it. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are the shape of love that has learned. I placed the envelope by the door to mail in the morning and turned out the lights. In the dark, the house did not feel empty. It felt ready. I slept deeply for the first time since the kitchen floor had risen to meet me. No dreams, no flashes of light behind my eyes, just the honest labor of a heart learning a new rhythm. When I woke, the first thought that found me was not a name, not a task, not a fear. It was a question that sounded like a door opening. What do you want today? I wanted air. I wanted movement. I wanted proof that my life could expand without anyone else's permission. I put on my walking shoes and a sweater and stepped outside. The morning smelled like cut grass and bakery sugar. I walked past the park, where young mothers pushed strollers and old men read newspapers with the patience of someone who has already learned every important headline. I let my steps set a slow drum. Houses became blocks. Blocks became a small distance I could measure and own. On the way back, I passed a storefront I had not noticed in years. In the window sat a row of fountain pens and a notebook bound in navy cloth. I went in and bought them. The clerk wrapped the notebook in tissue and tied it with twine. It felt ceremonial, as if I had purchased not paper but permission. At home, I cleared the desk in the spare room that used to be Ethan's. I did not remove the last poster on the wall. The corners had curled, but the image still held a boy's belief that he could jump higher than gravity. I let it stay, not as a shrine, but as a record of a truth that had once been real. I placed the new notebook in the center of the desk and wrote my name on the first page. Then I wrote a title for a chapter I did not yet know how to write. Life After Almost. The phone rang. I let it go to voicemail and listened with my finger hovering over delete. His voice filled the room. It sounded tired now. He asked for a meeting. He said he wanted to make things right. He said the word family as if it were a key that opened every lock. I saved the message and labeled it, not because I planned to answer it, but because I wanted a record of the moment I did not. By late afternoon, I had done something I had avoided for years. I took a long, careful look at myself in the mirror without criticism. I saw silver where there used to be brown, soft lines where there used to be proof of laughter I had unlearned. I shifted my shoulders back and met my own gaze. It did not look like a fight. It looked like a greeting. I brewed one last pot of tea and carried it to the desk. The room smelled like paper and patience. I picked up a pen, and for a moment I hesitated. Then I wrote 3 names on a fresh page: my banker, my lawyer, a woman I had once loved like a sister, a woman who had become very good at finding what other people tried to hide. I underlined her name and circled it once. Not yet, I told myself. Tomorrow, tonight belongs to calm. I closed the notebook and rested my hand on its cover. The house settled around me with a small creak, the gentle sound wood makes when it remembers its shape. Outside, the first star arrived, late and bright. I whispered thank you to no one in particular, and to everyone who had taught me the cost of my silence. Then I turned off the light and went to bed, ready for the morning when I would dial the number that would change what I knew and how I lived. I did not feel afraid. I felt rehearsed. I had practiced my exit from the old story in small, quiet acts. I knew my lines now. Tomorrow I would step onto a different stage and speak them out loud. The next morning arrived wrapped in fog, soft and gray, the kind of morning that muffles the sound of everything except your own thoughts. I made coffee, opened the notebook on my desk, and circled the name I had written the night before, Helena Moore. It had been years since I'd last spoken to her. Helena and I had met when we were young teachers at the same high school. She had the kind of sharp intelligence that made people confess things without realizing they were doing it. When she left teaching to become a private investigator, I had joked that she'd finally found a profession that paid her for being curious. She'd laughed and told me, "Curiosity is only dangerous when you stop using it." I hadn't used mine in years, but that was about to change. I found her number online. It hadn't changed. I hesitated before pressing call, the phone heavy in my hand. When she answered, her voice was older but still carried that dry warmth. Helena Moore Investigations. Helena, it's Clementine Beck. A pause, then a low chuckle. Clem? I'll be damned. I was just telling someone the world had gone quiet without your stubborn optimism. What pulled you out of hiding? Reality, I said. We agreed to meet at a cafe near the river. The place hadn't changed much, still smelled of roasted beans and rain-soaked pavement. Helena arrived in a brown coat, her gray hair tied up, eyes as alert as ever. She hugged me, the way someone does when they remember who you used to be but aren't sure who you are now. We ordered tea. She studied me for a moment. You look awake. That's the word everyone keeps using, I said. It's better than broken. What happened? My son, I said simply. That was enough. Helena leaned back, waiting. I told her about the hospital, the phone call, the silence that had followed. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, fingers wrapped around her cup. When I finished, she said, "You're not here because of the call. You're here because of the pattern that led to it." I nodded. I need to know everything he's been doing, where the money went, who's behind the company. I want to see the whole picture. Are you sure you want the truth? She asked quietly. Yes, I said. I've lived too long in the lie. Helena smiled, not unkindly. That's what everyone says. But the truth doesn't just free you, Clementine. It changes what you think you're capable of. I can live with that. She slid a small notebook across the table. Write down what you know. Names, dates, transfers. I'll start where the trail begins. I handed her a folder. I had prepared every record of the last 5 years. He used my name for half his loans. There's a joint account he doesn't know I've closed. If he's in deeper than I think, I need to see it before it collapses. You're not planning to report him, are you? Not yet. I just want the truth. Helena nodded. Give me a week, maybe less. As we stood to leave, she touched my shoulder. Clem, this isn't about revenge, right? I met her eyes. It's about remembering who I was before I forgot myself. That evening, I returned home to a sky painted in bruised blue. I sat by the window and watched the streetlights blink on one by one. The house felt different, less like a cage, more like a listening witness. I opened my journal again and wrote, "If I want peace, I must first invite chaos to the table." The next few days stretched like wire. I filled the hours with small tasks, cleaning, cooking, sorting old letters, but beneath it all, my mind circled around Helena's investigation. Each time my phone buzzed, a strange mix of dread and anticipation rippled through me. Ethan called twice. I didn't answer. He texted once, "We need to talk. Please don't do anything rash." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. The Clementine he knew would have replied. The one he had made expected to be forgiven. On the fifth evening, Helena called. Her voice was steady, but something in it had changed. "Clem, we need to meet. I found something." "Is it bad?" "It's worse than bad. It's stupid, and it's greedy, and it's exactly what you were afraid of." We met in her office, a small space above an antique bookstore, filled with the smell of old paper and rain. She handed me a folder. Inside were photographs, printouts, bank transfers, and one name that stood out among them all: Vanessa Carlyle, my daughter-in-law. "She's been helping him move money," Helena said. "Offshore accounts, fake consultancies, expense laundering. They've been living off your assets for 2 years. You've funded their new house, their cars, even a trip to Dubai, listed as a business conference." My hands trembled slightly as I flipped through the evidence. "He used my signature," Helena nodded. "More than once. The documents were scanned from your old files. He copied them. He probably thought you'd never notice." The room tilted for a moment. I sat down, steadying myself. "Why would he do this?" "Because he could," Helena said gently. "Because he thought you'd forgive him again." I stared at the photographs, Ethan's smiling face beside Vanessa, the luxury car, the wine glasses, the hotel receipt with both their names. The images looked staged, unreal, like scenes from a Life advertisement. But it was real. Every pixel was proof. "What do you want me to do?" Helena asked. I closed the folder and looked up at her. "Nothing yet. He needs to know that I know." Helena tilted her head. "You're planning something." "Not revenge," I said. "A reminder." Outside, thunder rolled over the city like a low warning. I felt it echo inside me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, with the folder open under the lamp. The pages fluttered in the air from the storm outside. My reflection in the window looked calm, but my eyes burned with something sharper than anger. I took a sheet of paper and began to write in my neatest handwriting. A short message, only 5 words, signed with a single initial: "A mother always knows. C." When I sealed the envelope and addressed it to Ethan's office, I didn't feel guilt or hesitation, only precision, like a conductor raising her hand before the first note of a symphony. Tomorrow, the music would begin. Morning arrived with the smell of wet concrete. The storm had rinsed the city clean, and the air through my window felt newer than usual. I dressed, ate a quiet breakfast, and walked to the corner shipping office with the envelope in my bag. The clerk asked if I wanted tracking and a signature. I said yes to both. There is a particular pleasure in precision when your life has been a long experiment in improvisation. I paid and watched her print the label with Ethan's name. As the envelope slid away on the black rubber belt, I felt the same calm I used to feel after finishing a well-graded stack of papers. Something was set in motion. Something would arrive where it needed to arrive. I went home and waited by refusing to wait. I watered the roses, changed the sheets, wiped the kitchen counters until they gleamed. I opened a window and let the late morning breeze turn the curtains into a slow breath. I could have turned on the television or scrolled through my phone, but I did not want any more voices. The quiet was honest. It told the truth, even when I did not ask it to. At 11:30, the tracking email arrived, delivered, signed for by a name I did not know. I made tea and took my cup to the window seat. The steam curled into the room and vanished. The minutes stretched like string. Then my phone began to ring. I let the first call pass into silence. The second, too. On the third, I answered. His voice was sharp around the edges, the practiced charm missing from the middle. "What is this supposed to mean?" "Hello to you, too," I said. "Which part are you asking about?" "The photo, the note. What are you doing?" "Letting in some light," I said. "Darkness has been breeding in the corners." He exhaled in a short laugh that sounded like the beginning of panic. "You have this wrong." "I have it documented," I said. "Wrong is not the word I would choose." There was a pause long enough to let honesty try the door. He did not open it. "I am coming over." "No." I said, and heard how new that word sounded in my voice. You may come at 3, not before. You will knock. If I do not answer, you will leave. He started to argue. I hung up. Then I turned off the ringer and placed the phone upside down on the table like a card I did not intend to play. Time sharpened itself to a clean edge. I put out 2 cups in the living room, not because I wanted company, but because I wanted ceremony. I opened the windows a little wider. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and rain. I set the folder from Helena on the chair beside mine. I did not feel like a judge. I felt like a witness who had finally decided to speak. At 3 on the dot, there was a knock. I waited just long enough to remind myself the choice was mine, then opened the door. Ethan stood on the porch in a dark suit that had probably been pressed this morning. He looked expensive and tired. Something hot and careless flashed through his eyes when he saw me, the same spark he used to display when he wanted to win an argument just to win it. You look well, he said. I am well, I said. He tried to step past me. I did not move. He stopped, surprised, then stepped back the width of a single breath. The manners returned to his face. May I come in? You may. He followed me to the living room. His gaze flicked to the folder on the chair, then to the 2 cups on the table, then back to me. His mouth twitched into an almost smile. I gestured to the sofa. He sat, half-turned, ready to stand if the conversation did not go the way he intended. I poured tea without asking how he took it. I handed him a cup. He set it down without tasting it. You sent that to my office, he said. Anyone could have seen it. Good, I said. Secrets grow in the dark. I prefer sunlight. He stared at me as if seeing a new person he had not been introduced to yet. Then he reached into his jacket and produced the printed photo. He held it between his fingers like a piece of evidence in a case he believed he could win. Where did you get this? From a world that looks carefully, I said. It is not what it looks like. It always is, I said. That is why people resent photographs. He flinched. The confident angle of his jaw softened, then hardened again. He pointed at the envelope on the coffee table, where I had placed a second item for him to find. A list of transfers and dates I could recite like a prayer. You kept records. I kept faith, I said. This is what remains when faith is spent. His eyes flicked across the page, down the columns of amounts that had my handwriting beside them, notes from years when I still believed that emergencies were real and that love must mean rescue. As he read, the silence between us changed shape. It no longer sounded like an empty room. It sounded like a verdict before the words. Finally, he looked up. Why would you do this to me? I almost laughed. Instead, I set my cup down and folded my hands. Ethan, I am not doing anything to you. I am no longer doing something for you. There is a difference that matters. He stood up and began to pace. The habit returned, the familiar expansion of his shoulders when he wanted the room to obey. He talked about pressure and timing and the burden of leadership. He explained the way a person explains when he needs you to mistake detail for truth. I watched him move and felt nothing rise to meet him. The old rope inside me had been cut clean. He did not know that yet. He kept tugging. When he stopped, his breath quickened like a runner who had reached the end of a track he thought was longer. He looked at me as if the force of his words could push me back into a shape he recognized. Then he softened his voice. Mom, we can handle this quietly. If you need assurances, I will give them. We will restructure. We will make you whole. I will put everything in writing. You have my word. Your word was in the nurse's hallway, I said. It did not show up. He swallowed. A thin line appeared between his eyebrows. That was cruel. It was accurate, I said. He picked up the photo again and stared at the woman on his arm as if she might step out of the frame and rescue him with a better explanation. He set it down very carefully this time, like something that might burn. What do you want? He asked. Want is the wrong question. I have a list of what will be, I said. He waited. You will stop using my name for any financial instrument. You will supply me with a list of accounts in which my signature appears. You will resign me from any guarantee. You will stop telling people you built your life without help. His mouth opened and closed. That last one is not enforceable. Correct, I said. It is simply true. He sank back onto the sofa. Some visible muscle in him seemed to loosen, the one that had held a pose for years. For a long moment, he did not speak. When he did, His voice was small in the way a memory is small. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said. "Hate is noisy. I prefer quiet. Quiet tells the truth. I do not trust you. That is quieter and heavier." He stared at his hands. The watch on his wrist caught the light and made a neat white line on the ceiling. It reminded me of stars you can only see if you drive far from town. He followed my gaze and covered the watch as if it were an accusation. "I am sorry," he said. The words sounded like someone else had written them, and he was reading aloud. I nodded. "Thank you for saying it. Now prove it. That is the only currency left between us." He stood, as if a string had been pulled. "Can I come back tomorrow?" "No," I said. "You may send the documents by the end of the week. You may not call after 10 at night. You may not arrive without an invitation. These are my house rules." He blinked, confused, as if I had spoken another language. I added one more. "You may not ask for money again." He laughed without humor. Then he ran a hand through his hair and tried to look like a man considering compromise. He failed. The room did not bend toward him the way it used to. It stayed level. He walked to the door and paused. He did not turn around when he asked the last question. "Who told you?" "Truth," I said. She finally remembered my address. After he left, the house held the outline of him for a moment, then released it the way breath leaves a window. I poured the untouched tea into the sink and washed both cups. The warm water on my hands felt medicinal. Evening gathered across the rooms, soft and patient. I took the folder back to my chair and read until the last light faded. Names, dates, numbers, places, the record of a life performed for an audience that applauded on cue. The record of the woman who had paid for the tickets and cleaned up after the show. I closed the folder and set it aside. My heart was steady. The silence in the room was steady. I picked up my pen and wrote in the Navy notebook. "The first door has opened. There will be more. I will not run to close them. I will stand in the hallway and let the air move through." I put down the pen and let the words stay. Then I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark for a minute longer than was comfortable. Not because I enjoy discomfort, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I could sit with it and not mistake it for danger. In that small experiment, I felt it again. Not victory, not even relief, just the steady arrival of a truth I could live inside. Tomorrow, Helena would call with more. Tomorrow, I would be ready. Helena called just after dawn. Her voice came through clear and unhurried. "He'll have opened it by now." "I know," I said, staring at the rain running down the window pane. "I can almost feel the echo." "Good," she replied. "Let him sit in that silence for a while. The kind of silence that tells the truth better than words." After we hung up, I made breakfast I didn't intend to eat. The toast cooled untouched, the kettle clicked off, and the clock hands inched forward with deliberate cruelty. It wasn't nerves that kept me from moving. It was patience. For the first time in my life, I was learning to let discomfort do its work. Around 9, my phone buzzed with a message. "We need to talk. Now." I didn't answer. I deleted the message, brewed a second cup of tea, and carried it to the window. Below, the world moved at its usual rhythm. Cars, umbrellas, the neighbor walking her dog. Only I knew that somewhere across town, a carefully arranged world was beginning to crack. At 11, Helena sent another message. "He's called 3 people already, a lawyer, a business partner, and his wife." I typed one line in reply. "Good. Let them all learn what truth sounds like when it's spoken softly." By noon, the calls began again. I let them ring, one after another. His name filled the screen, each time a little more desperate. I imagined him pacing, trying to calculate the damage. I wondered if he would finally feel the panic I had felt when the nurse said, "We almost lost you twice." At 2 o'clock, I finally answered. "Mom." "Ethan," I said calmly, "you sound unwell. What is this? You're trying to ruin me. Who gave you that photo? Who's feeding you these lies?" "They're not lies," I said. "They're records, facts, things you left lying around for someone else to clean up. I've spent a lifetime doing that, haven't I?" He fell silent for a moment. Then the practiced charm returned. "Mom, listen to me. Vanessa and we made mistakes, but we can fix this. You've always believed in second chances." "I used to," I said. "Now I believe in boundaries." He exhaled sharply. "You don't understand how bad this looks. If this leaks..." It won't leak, I interrupted. It's not a threat, Ethan. It's a mirror. Look closely. I could almost hear him blink on the other end, unprepared for how calm I sounded. Mom, please. No, I said gently. Not this time. When I ended the call, my hands didn't tremble. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. By late afternoon, the sky broke open into sunlight. I stepped outside to the garden, kneeling beside the rose bushes. Their petals were heavy from the rain, bending under the weight. I trimmed the wilted edges, careful and deliberate. You could ruin a flower by cutting too fast. But if you did it right, it came back stronger. Helena arrived just as I was washing my hands. She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. You did it, didn't you? I just sent a letter, I said. The rest is gravity. She followed me into the kitchen. He'll come to you, Clem. They always do when the walls start closing in. I know, I said. And when he does, I'll be ready. We sat at the table in companionable silence. She poured herself coffee, black as her humor. What will you do when he finally admits everything? Listen, I said, and decide what to remember. She laughed softly. That's colder than revenge. No, I said, it's warmer. I'm saving my mercy for someone who'll use it. That night, I left every light in the house off, except the lamp beside my bed. The glow spread gently across the room, touching the walls, the dresser, the half-read book on the nightstand. I thought of Ethan sitting in his glass office, the letter open on his desk, the photo staring up at him like a ghost of his own making. For years, I had lived in the shadow of his needs. Now he was learning what life felt like without my light. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark. Lesson 1. Outside, thunder rumbled again. Tomorrow, the storm would start in earnest. He came at dusk, the hour when the sky forgets how to be certain. The doorbell rang once, then again, then settled into a practiced patience. I let the second ring fade before I opened the door. Ethan stood on the porch with rain on his shoulders and calculation in his eyes. The old rhythm tried to play between us, the one where he speaks first and I follow. It did not start. May I come in? He asked. You may. He stepped into the hallway and looked around as if the furniture might offer him an easier version of me. His gaze landed on the lamp, then the 2 cups on the table, then the folder beside my chair. He reached for charm and found only fragments. This is all a misunderstanding, he said quickly. Someone is trying to hurt us. If you have concerns, you bring them to me, not to my office. That was reckless. I walked past him and sat. I poured tea. I did not offer sugar. Reckless, I said, is leaving your mother to die alone and calling it a scheduling conflict. This is order. You are not used to it from me. He stood a moment longer, then sat across from me and placed his phone on the coffee table like a warrant. It vibrated at once. He flipped it face down and tried to smile. You look good, Mom. I am good. The word tasted clean. He cleared his throat. I want to apologize for what I said to the nurse. It came out wrong. We had investors at the table. There is pressure you do not understand. There is pressure you chose, I said. There is love you did not. He flinched, then leaned forward. I can fix this. Whatever you think you know, I can explain. That photo is nothing. The transfers are complicated. The accounts are standard practice. We do this in growth phases. If you reopen the lines for a quarter, we will restructure and close them. You will be protected. I slid the folder across the table. It whispered against the wood. He hesitated, then opened it. His eyes moved left to right, then back again, reading the way a person reads a language he thought he invented. Inside were copies of letters on letterhead, stamped and signed, revocations, closures, notarized notices, a schedule. He looked up slowly. What is this? The future, I said. His mouth tightened. You moved assets. I moved them home, I said. You removed your guarantees. I restored my name to myself. You filed a trust. I did. He scanned the next page, and the color left his face in careful degrees. Effective dates, notification receipts, contact names at institutions he had considered extensions of his will. He turned another page and found a list of accounts with my signature attached. Beside each, a line in my handwriting, rescinded, rescinded, rescinded. You cannot do this, he whispered. I already have. His phone began to ring again. Vanessa. Her name lit the screen like a small flare. He ignored it for the first time in his life. Then he answered, but did not take his eyes off me. I am with her, he said. His voice tried to steady itself. No, you need to listen. No, not now. I told you, this is not about optics. This is about liquidity. He paused, then short, sharp words I had heard him use on calls with junior employees. Do not charge anything. Do not call Chen. Do not post. He hung up and stared at the folder as if it were a hole in the floor. The clock in the hall counted our breaths. Finally, he said, very softly, how long have you been planning this? Since the ceiling turned into a storm and I fell to the kitchen floor, I said. Since the nurse walked into the hallway and I heard my son choose a reservation over my pulse. Since I realized I had taught you to believe I would always take the weight. He closed the folder and held it as if it might bite. You are going to ruin me. I am going to stop carrying you, I said. If that ruins you, you were never standing. He stood so quickly his cup rattled. His hands went to his hair, then to his pockets, then to the back of the chair, looking for a place to put the panic. He moved to the window and watched the street as if rescue might arrive in a black car. Do you understand what this will do? He said without turning. The lease, the payroll, the partners, they will think. They will think what is true, I said. That you built your house on someone else's foundation and called it yours. He turned back, eyes bright and hard. You are punishing me. No. I am ending my participation in a lie. His phone rang again. He answered in 2 words. Speak. He listened, then closed his eyes. When he opened them, he had the look of a boy who had just learned what gravity is. That was the bank, he said. They received your notice. They want updated collateral by Friday. He laughed once, a sound with no air in it. Friday, I nodded. The schedule is in the folder. He stared at me, searching for something that used to be here. The soft place, the open door. He found none. Finally he sat and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. When he spoke, the arrogance had slipped, and something tender showed through. Why did you not tell me what you needed? He said. We could have found a way that did not look like this. I did tell you, I said. I told you in every yes I said when I meant no. I told you in every transfer that came with a sermon about responsibility you never heard. I told you in the way I kept showing up while you practiced disappearing. His shoulders dropped. He looked down at the folder again. What do you expect me to do? Tell the truth, I said. To yourself first, then to your wife, then to the people who believed the myth. Sell what you cannot afford. Live inside what you can. Learn how to call a mother because you want to know how she is, not because you need a signature. He swallowed. And if I do, then we will see what grows in the space where entitlement used to sit. He was quiet. On the street outside, a child shouted and a dog barked, and the ordinary world went on with its durable indifference. He reached for the photograph I had sent and studied it with new eyes. He set it down carefully and slid the folder back to his side of the table, as if possession could slow consequence. He stood and walked to the door. His hand paused on the knob. He did not turn when he asked, "Do you still love me?" I looked at the back of his head, and to my own surprise, I felt something gentle rise and hold. I loved the boy who learned to walk holding my hands, and the young man who cried in my kitchen the night his father died because he did not know how to be a man without him. I will love the man who tells the truth. I do not love the version of you that believes my love is a bottomless well you can drink from without saying thank you. He nodded once, as if the sentence had taken something from him and given something back. He opened the door and stepped into the blue evening. I stood in the hallway and listened as his footsteps faded. The house settled around me with a small sigh. I returned to the living room and picked up the second envelope on the table, the one I had addressed to myself. Inside lay 3 notes on heavy paper, written by my banker, my lawyer, and Helena. I read them again, slow, the way you reread instructions for a ritual you are learning. Then I placed them in the desk drawer and locked it. The phone rang one more time. I let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, a second line began to ring. I recognized the number, the institution that had once treated me like an addendum to my son's ambition. I answered. "Good evening." "Mrs. Beck," said a pleasant voice with a steel thread through it. "We are calling to confirm receipt of your notice. We will proceed according to the schedule you provided unless we hear otherwise by close of business tomorrow." "You will not hear otherwise," I said. "Thank you." I set the phone down and walked to the window. The streetlight had come on, and the first moth of the night flickered at the glass. Somewhere across town, Ethan was opening new doors and finding not rescue, but air. The letter had not ruined him. It had removed the net. I turned off the lamp and let the room darken around me. The silence was deep and whole. At the edge of it, I could feel the shift I had promised myself in the hospital. Not anger, not victory, authority, the kind that arrives when a person finally aligns their life with what they know. I went to bed early and slept without dreaming. The house held itself steady. In the morning, the consequences would begin to speak in voices other than mine. That was the point. That was the plan. It was not over. It was just beginning. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The air felt different, not heavy, but expectant. The kind of quiet that comes before something breaks or blooms. I walked through the house barefoot, opening curtains, letting in the thin gray light. Every window carried the reflection of a life rearranged. No more unopened envelopes. No more waiting for an apology that cost me peace. The clock ticked softly, and each sound was a small reassurance. I was still here, still choosing myself. At 7, Helena called. "He's already spinning," she said without greeting. "Your son called 2 of his investors, tried to blame an accounting error. But one of them leaked a screenshot, the offshore transfers, your forged signatures. It's spreading." I took a slow breath. Let it spread. You're not afraid? I was, for 30 years. I'm done rehearsing fear. Helena was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think he's starting to realize what he did wasn't just unethical. It was personal. He used you like a safety net that could never tear. Maybe he'll finally see the hole he fell through," I said. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my reflection in the dark window. I could almost see the outline of my younger self, the woman who had given everything without keeping a piece for herself. She was fading now, dissolving into someone new. The first news alert arrived at 9:15. Beck Technologies faces allegations of financial misconduct. I scrolled through it slowly. No mention of my name, though the details were unmistakable. The article quoted a close source, claiming internal documents were under review. I closed the laptop. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was relief, the kind that comes when the truth no longer needs a disguise. By noon, my phone rang again. Helena this time, her voice lower. "He's coming apart." Vanessa left the apartment. "His partners have frozen the accounts." He called me. "Can you believe it?" Asked if I was manipulating you. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you didn't need help to find the truth." A small smile formed before I could stop it. "He must hate that." "He doesn't hate it," she said. "He doesn't understand it. That's worse." After the call, I spent the afternoon cleaning the study. I boxed old files, old letters, old guilt. Each drawer I emptied felt like clearing an old wound. Beneath the clutter, I found a photograph Ethan at 12, sitting on the porch steps, his hand resting on the dog we'd rescued that summer. His smile was real then. Unlearned, unposed, I sat with the photo for a while, tracing the corner where the paper had curled. "Where did we lose each other?" I whispered. The house didn't answer. But somewhere inside, I knew. The day I decided to love him more than I loved myself. By evening, the sky turned amber. I cooked dinner, something simple, pasta and garlic, and olive oil, and ate by the window. The television stayed off. The only sound was the city breathing outside my door. When the doorbell rang, I didn't move. The second ring was softer. I stood, wiped my hands, and opened the door. Ethan stood there again, but he looked smaller. Not physically smaller in spirit, like someone who had walked too long without direction. His hair was damp, his eyes red. He didn't have the arrogance anymore, just exhaustion. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I come in?" I hesitated, then nodded once. He stepped inside, glancing around as though expecting the house to scold him. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "Everything's falling apart. The company, the accounts, Vanessa's gone. They think I did this on purpose." "You did," I said softly. He flinched. "I didn't mean to. I thought you'd always be there to help me fix it." "That's the problem," I said. "You thought I existed to save you." He sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands. "I didn't know what I was doing. I just wanted to keep it all from collapsing. Then you should have learned to build it on your own." For a long while, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked, The rain began again, and I realized we were sitting exactly where I had once helped him fill out his first college application. That same table, same chair, different truth. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." The words landed somewhere deep, but didn't undo anything. Still, I felt something shift, not forgiveness, but release. "I believe you're sorry," I said. "That's a start. Now go rebuild what's left of you." He nodded, slowly. "I don't know how. You'll learn. Failure is a better teacher than I ever was." He tried to smile, but his face broke into something closer to grief. Then he reached across the table and took my hand the same way he did when he was a child afraid of thunder. "I'll fix it," he said. "You'll try," I corrected, "and I'll watch from a distance. That's the best I can do now." When he left, the house felt lighter. For the first time, the air didn't carry his noise, only my breathing. I sat back down and looked at the empty teacup between us. The warmth was gone, but the imprint of his hand still lingered on the wood. I whispered, "Lesson 2. Then I opened my journal and wrote beneath it, "Freedom isn't walking away from someone, it's walking back to yourself." The rain paused sometime after midnight and left the world rinsed. I woke to that clean silence a little before sunrise and lay still, listening to the house breathe. Grief was somewhere in the room, but not in charge. It sat in a corner like a guest who had finally learned manners. I made coffee and opened the window above the sink. The air smelled like wet stone and rosemary. Birds stitched a thin song between the chimneys. I set my cup on the sill and felt a steady gratitude for simple things that asked nothing back. By 8, the news caught up with the truth. The headline was careful, the kind of sentence that is afraid to be wrong. Allegations reviewed, leadership under evaluation. I read it once and closed the page. The world would have its appetite. I did not need to feed it. Helena called at 9. Her voice was dry as always and softer than usual. "Your move worked," she said. "The partners have retained their own counsel. The board has asked for a statement. Vanessa has moved to a hotel. Someone took a photo of all that luggage and sold it to a blog." I held the phone between my ear and shoulder and rinsed my cup. What did Ethan do? "He sent one sentence to the board," she said. "I need time." The rest of the day, he spent calling people he used to avoid. Loan officers, vendors, quiet friends, who know how to say unwelcome things without flinching. I leaned my back against the counter. "That is almost promising." "Almost," Helena said. Then she paused. "There is something else." I let the quiet ask the question for me. "Vanessa called me last night. She wanted to know how much you know. She wanted to know how you knew it. She made a suggestion about a sum of money that would make my work unnecessary." I felt the old heat rise, then pass. "Did you answer her?" "I told her I prefer clean rooms to dirty closets," Helena said, "and that I do not accept payment for silence." She hung up without saying goodbye. That kind never says goodbye. I watched a line of light crawl across the floor. "Thank you," I said. She let the gratitude sit a moment, then added, "You should also know there is a smaller story buried under the large one. Your son has another account. It is not illegal. It is private. He opened it 6 months after his father died. Automatic transfers, small amounts, to a foundation that pays hospital bills for people who do not have family." I put a hand on the counter to steady myself. "He never told me." "That is the point of private," Helena said gently. "I thought you might want the whole person, not just the worst day." We ended the call, and I stood very still. It would have been easy to let that new fact wash everything else clean. I did not let it. It was not a pardon. It was a shard of light in a complicated room. I could hold both. The day stretched into a practical list. I changed the sheets again just to feel the quiet order of cotton corners. I wiped the front steps. I walked to the corner market and bought lemons and parsley and a magazine I did not intend to read. People glanced at me and then away, the way strangers do when they sense a story they cannot place. I smiled at the cashier, and he smiled back with the relief of ordinary kindness. Back home, I opened the closet and pulled down the old sewing box. The lid stuck for a second and then gave. Inside lay needles, buttons, a thimble dented by years of habit. I sat by the window and mended the cuff of a cardigan I loved. The thread slid through wool with the small hush that only fabric makes. The stitch by stitch calmed my hands. Repair is a language. My body understood it. Just after noon, my phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number. I answered without thinking. A woman introduced herself as a reporter and asked if I wanted to give a statement to correct misinformation. I told her I wished her a pleasant day and that my life was not a public lesson. She tried twice more. I set the phone down and walked away. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is the only sentence that does not wander. In the afternoon, Helena stopped by with a paper bag and the face she wears when she knows something I do not. Bread, olives, and a folder. The food for your body, the paper for your mind, she said. I opened the folder and saw the outlines of a timeline. Dates on the left, events on the right, transfers, dinners, orders, invoices, borrowed watches, borrowed promises. In the middle of the page, she had circled one date and written a single note. This is where the rope began to fray. I traced the circle with my finger. It was the month Ethan moved into the apartment with glass walls. It was the first time he had told me that the view was worth the price, because it reminded him he had climbed. It was also the month he had asked me to co-sign yet another line, and then disappeared for a week when I hesitated. Helena tore a piece of bread and dipped it in oil. "Tell me the part you have not said out loud," she murmured, not looking at me. I looked at the circled month until the numbers blurred. "The part I have not said is that I enjoyed being needed. It gave my days a shape. When he stopped asking for help with homework and started asking for money, I told myself it was the same thing translated. I did not notice the language had changed to something I could not speak without losing my name." She nodded, as if she had been waiting for me to meet that sentence. Then she wiped her fingers and pushed another sheet toward me. A single paragraph. It was a draft of a trust amendment. My name, my initials. The clauses that turned my house from an open door to a home with keys. I read it twice. My chest loosened in a way that felt like medicine. "Will you file it?" I asked. "I already did," she said. "You authorized me last week when you signed that power of attorney. You were still pale and stubborn and pretending to be fine. I took advantage of your honesty." I laughed, and the sound felt like a window finally opened. "You always did." She stood and kissed the top of my head, the way an older sister might. "You are allowed to rest," she said. Then she left me to the soft afternoon, and the stack of papers that confirmed my life now had a spine. By evening, the street was lit gold, and the air smelled like toast from someone else's kitchen. Ethan had not called. I did not expect him to. I made soup and ate it slowly, watching steam rise and fade. After the dishes, I sat at my desk and opened the Navy notebook. I wrote 3 lines. "He is failing loudly. I am healing, quietly. Both are necessary." I closed the notebook and walked into the room that used to be his. The last poster still hung where it always had. For the first time, I noticed a tear in the corner held by a piece of tape. I smoothed the paper with my palm and left the tear where it was. Not everything needs to be fixed, to be honest. The doorbell rang just after 9. The sound landed in my throat. I took a breath and opened the door. It was not Ethan. It was Vanessa. She wore a coat, the color of ash, and carried a handbag that belonged in photographs. Her eyes were sharp with the kind of fear that comes when a person has trained their life to perform and the stage lights suddenly go out. "We need to talk," she said. "No," I said. "You need to listen." She looked as if she might push past me. Then she saw my face and thought better of it. She took a breath that begged for control and produced a thin smile. "May I please come in?" "You may," I said, and led her to the living room. She chose the sofa and crossed her legs with a precision that had nothing to do with comfort. I sat in the chair by the window and waited. She began with flattery. "You are clearly very intelligent. You moved quickly. You hurt him more than anyone else could." I did not move. I am not interested in hurting anyone. I am interested in ending what never should have started. She leaned forward. "Then let us make a clean end. You can unwind this with a few calls. We can agree on a number that recognizes your contribution. You can step back with dignity. No one needs to know the rest." I looked at her. The performance was immaculate. The fear beneath it was loud. "What are you protecting?" I asked. She blinked. "Ourselves." The answer was honest by accident. I stood and walked to the mantel where the family portrait had once hung. There was only clean paint now. I turned back to her. "You will tell the board what you know. You will stop spending money that is not yours. You will leave my son to learn what a day costs." She gave a thin laugh. "He will hate you for this." "He already did, when he was not thinking," I said. "He may also learn to thank me when he begins." She rose, too quickly. The mask slipped for a breath, and I saw the girl she must have been when the world taught her that applause is safer than truth. She picked up her purse and moved toward the door. At the threshold she turned. There was no softness left. "You have just made a very powerful enemy," she said. I shook my head. "No, I have just stopped pretending you were a friend." She left without slamming the door. The quiet flowed back like a tide. I stood alone in the hallway and felt my pulse steady in my wrists. I walked to the kitchen and poured water into a glass and drank it standing up, the way nurses teach you to after they remove the needle. The water was cold and clean. It tasted like the beginning of a new rule. Before bed, I wrote one more line in the notebook. "I do not bargain with the past." Then I turned out the light and let the dark cover the room. Somewhere, not far away, a siren sounded and softened. In my chest, the steadiness held. Tomorrow would bring paperwork and questions and maybe ugly noise. I felt ready for all of it, not because I wanted to fight, but because I had finally stopped fighting myself. Lesson 3, I whispered into the quiet. Build a door only you can open. Morning light found the house before I did. It slipped under the curtains, soft and forgiving, pretending not to notice that everything inside had changed. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the closed door of the guest room where Vanessa had sat the night before. It was strange how a single visit could stain a room with echoes that linger long after the footsteps were gone. I made coffee and watched it swirl into darkness. My hands were steady now, my thoughts less so. Helena had said once that truth isn't a single flash of lightning, it's a storm that keeps circling until you finally stop running from it. The storm was still here. Around mid-morning, a knock came soft, uncertain. When I opened the door, Ethan stood there again, holding something small in his hand. An envelope. His voice was quieter this time. "I thought you should see this." Inside was a letter hand-signed, stamped by the bank. Petition for restructuring of personal assets under voluntary review. He had done it. He'd surrendered the company, the cars, the illusion of control. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "That's the right start," I replied. He exhaled. "Vanessa's gone to Europe. She said she needs space." "Let her have it," I said. "I thought I'd feel free," he whispered. "But it just feels empty." Emptiness is where rebuilding begins. Don't fill it too fast. He looked at me for a long time. "You really won't help?" "I already am," I said softly. For the first time, he didn't argue. He nodded once and left, closing the door gently behind him. When the silence returned, it didn't hurt. It hummed. It vibrated with something alive. Later that day, Helena arrived without warning. She had that look again, the one she wore before a difficult truth. "You should sit," she said. I did. "There's something you need to know about the investigation." I waited. The trail didn't stop with Ethan and Vanessa. Some of the transfers led elsewhere, smaller payments, recurring, precise. They were routed through a holding account under another name. She slid a document toward me. My breath caught when I saw it. Helena Moore. My eyes shot up. "You?" She nodded. "Yes, but it's not what you think. Years ago, after your husband died, Ethan came to me for advice. He said he wanted to protect you, to set aside an emergency fund in your name but off the books. He used my firm to do it. I didn't ask enough questions then. I thought he was being kind. But that same account, later, became one of the routes for the money he hid." My pulse quickened. "You're saying you were part of it?" "Unwittingly," she said. "But still part of it. That's why I didn't tell you before. I needed to confirm. I've already filed disclosure papers. It'll clear my name, but it might complicate yours." The words fell like glass. "Complicate how?" "Because technically, the account was under your trust ID. If the authorities dig deeper, they might think you knew." I sat back, staring at the grain of the table. So even when I tried to step away, his shadow found me. Helena's voice softened. "We'll fix this, Clem. I've already contacted a financial mediator. It's messy, but not unfixable. You just need to be ready when they come asking." I laughed quietly, not bitterly, but the kind of laugh you make when you realize the world never stops testing you. "Ready? I've been ready for 30 years. When she left, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the rain begin again. Drops crawled down the glass, like tiny decisions taking too long to fall. I picked up my pen and wrote in the Navy notebook. Lesson 4. The truth isn't a wall. It's a door that never stops opening, even when you wish it would close. They came at noon with polite voices and clipboards. Not raiders, not villains, just 2 auditors who smelled faintly of printer ink and rain. They asked if I had a moment to clarify a few items. I made tea and set the cups down carefully, as if the ritual could slow time. We sat in the living room, where the light was good, and the truth could not pretend to be smaller than it was. They asked about the account under my trust ID. I answered with the plainness I had earned. I told them when I learned of it. I told them who set it up. I told them I had closed every door I could find and had left a list of the rest for them to lock. They did not look surprised. They wrote neatly. They thanked me for my clarity, and when they stood to leave, one of them glanced at the roses through the window and said his grandmother grew the same variety. The world keeps inserting tenderness in places it does not belong, and sometimes that is the only way a person can bear it. After they left, Helena called. Her voice had the brittle calm a bridge uses when it knows too many cars are coming. I met the auditors, she said. They are thorough and not cruel. I gave them full access. There is one more piece you need before they show it to you. I waited for the floor to tilt. It did not. Tell me. She arrived with a thin folder and the careful attention of someone setting down glass. She opened to a page with a bank header and 2 words handwritten in the memo line beside a series of transfers. Rose Fund. My throat closed. He named it after my garden. Helena nodded. The earlier transfers we discussed, the small charity gifts, they came from here. But so did something else. She turned the page. Invoices, legal fees, a contract with a clause highlighted in yellow. Lien, on personal residence of guarantor if collateral falls below threshold. My chest went cold. That is my house. Not anymore, Helena said. Read the date. I traced the numbers with my finger. It was 3 months before my heart failed. 3 months before the launch dinner. A second document lay beneath, signed by an investor whose name I recognized from Ethan's press interviews. Chen. The clause required a personal guarantee from me in addition to the corporate line. I had never seen the contract. My signature did not appear. There was a notation in the margin beside the clause, in a handwriting I knew like my own, over my dead body. I sat back hard. Ethan wrote that? Helena took a breath. He refused to offer your house. The investor pressed. The company was out of runway. Ethan rerouted funds through the account in my firm to buy enough time to unwind the clause without alerting the board. It was wrong. It was illegal. It also kept your deed from becoming a lever in someone else's hand. The room moved a little. I held still and let it pass. Why did he not tell me? Because he is your son, she said, and pride has always been his first language. Because he thought he was fixing a mess he made by making a bigger one he could control. Because he believed you would forgive the sin faster than he could survive the humiliation. The ugly and the tender braided themselves and would not separate. I stared at the words over my dead body until they blurred. I remembered the tone he used with the nurse. I remembered the envelope I had sent. I remembered the boy who once stood between me and a barking dog with a plastic sword and the certainty that plastic would be enough. There is more, Helena said. The woman in the photograph. She waited until I looked up. Not a mistress in the way people are eager to say. A contractor. She built identities for clients who needed clean exits from dirty deals. Vanessa hired her first. Ethan met her later and paid her to unwind the Chen clauses in 3 agreements without dragging your name into the filings. He was careless with the meetings. He made it look like something else. But the invoices are here. The timelines match. I felt something inside me tilt and right itself, like a ship that has found a deeper wave. So he was not just stealing. He was stealing and shielding and lying and drowning all at once. Yes, Helena said gently. 2 truths can live in one room. He betrayed you. He also interposed himself between you and a man who would have taken your house without blinking. The auditors will see both. They are not here to judge your love. They are here to balance the books. I closed the folder and held it to my chest. For a long minute I said nothing. The clock in the hall counted the distance between who I thought my son was and who he had also been. When I could speak, my voice surprised me. It was not forgiving. It was not angry. It was something quieter, I need to tell him I know. Helena's mouth lifted at one corner. Then tell him. But tell him without rescuing him from the weight of it. After she left, I called Ethan and asked him to come when the light turned soft. He arrived at the hour. The day forgets which direction it is traveling. He stood in the doorway as if a threshold could refuse him. He looked at my hands, at my face, at the folder on the table. He did not reach for any of it. Sit, I said. He sat. I opened to the page with the clause. I slid the paper toward him. I did not look away while he read. He flinched at his own handwriting. When he reached the memo line that said Rose Fund, he closed his eyes. Why did you not tell me? I asked. He swallowed. Because I did not want you to see what I had become in the process of trying to protect you. Because I thought the protection would count more than the theft. Because I believed that if I could keep the house safe, I could afford to lose your respect for a while. The last sentence came out like a stone. You lost both, I said gently. That is how math works when the numbers are people. He lifted his eyes. I am sorry for every door I walked through that took me further from you. I am sorry I loved what your love could buy me more than I loved the person who gave it. I am sorry I used silence like a tool. He glanced at the clause again. And I am not sorry I kept your name off this page. The line landed in me like a pin dropped on a map. It did not absolve him. It did not erase the hospital or the dinner or the lies. It added a second coordinate. The space between is where a human life actually happens. I reached across the table and placed my hand on the folder, not on his. He understood. He nodded once and let his hands stay where they were. He did not ask me to fix anything. He did not ask to be forgiven. He sat in the room he had helped break and waited for a kind of weather that does not come quickly. When he finally stood to go, his face had the pale calm of a person who has stopped rehearsing the best version of himself and is willing to meet the real one. At the door, he turned. What do I do now? You return what you can, I said. You tell the truth to people who will not clap for it. You let the emptiness teach you how to be honest. He nodded. And you write me a letter when you have earned the right to send it. Not before. He did not smile. Good, he said. Then he was gone, and the house reassembled around the space he left the way water closes over an oar. I took the folder to my desk and slid it into the drawer with the others. Then I opened the Navy notebook and wrote, 2 truths. He failed me. He tried to shield me. I will not choose one to erase the other. I will live inside the whole. The sky over the street turned the color of plums. Somewhere a violinist practiced the same bar again and again until the wrong note stopped winning. I stood at the window and let that stubborn music do its small work. Later, when the phone rang, I did not look at the screen. I answered and listened. It was one of the auditors. His voice carried a professional kindness. We have what we need for now, Mrs. Beck. There will be letters, there will be forms, there will be time. Thank you, I said, and meant it. After I hung up, the house was very quiet. Not the frightened quiet of the hospital, not the angry quiet of the first week. A clean quiet with room for breath. I walked to the garden and touched a rose that had opened while I was busy learning the language of consequence. It was the pale pink kind that looks almost white at dusk. I did not cut it. I left it where it grew. Lesson 5. I wrote when I came back in. Truth changes shape, but it does not change sides. I closed the book and turned off the lamp. The hallway was dark and kind. Tomorrow, I would begin writing the trust letter to myself that explained everything in words I would not be ashamed to reread. Tomorrow, I would choose a new lock for the front door. Tomorrow, I would practice opening it only for people who know how to knock. Tonight I slept, and the dream that came was simple. I was sweeping a floor that had gathered years of dust. The broom moved softly and did not complain. With each pass, the boards shone the color of honey. When I woke, my hands felt warm, as if a house had thanked me for finally treating it like a home. I moved through the last of the paperwork, the way a swimmer moves through a final cold lane. One form at a time, one signature, one steady breath. The letters arrived in neat envelopes and left again with my initials pressed into their corners like small seals. When I finished, I stood at the kitchen sink and watched the kettle fog the window. The steam made the street outside look softer than it was. Maybe that is all healing is. The world does not change. Your eyes learn to meet it with less fear. Helena drove me to the coast on a Saturday, so clear it felt borrowed. We did not talk much. The road turned from city to field to a thin ribbon of asphalt between salt grass and water. The little cottage I had found sat on a hill, with 2 windows facing the sea, and a roof that looked like it had learned all kinds of weather. The realtor left the key under a chipped blue pot. I lifted it and felt a quiet awe when the door opened. Bare floors, white walls, a built-in shelf, the height of my shoulder waiting for stories. I stood in the middle of the room and listened to the space answer me with an echo that sounded like yes. We unpacked in silence. There was not much to place. A kettle, 2 mugs, a blanket with weight, the Navy notebook. I set it on the table by the front window and opened to a fresh page. Title first, Helena said, leaning against the doorframe like a minister allowing herself one joke. I wrote the words as if they already belonged to the air. A mother's exit plan. She nodded, satisfied, and went to see about the lock on the back gate while I let my hand rest on the title a moment longer than necessary. I had always been good at beginnings. Endings were what scared me. This did not feel like an ending. It felt like a center. In the afternoon we walked the beach and let the tide take our footprints as soon as we made them. Helena talked about a case she was closing, and I listened to the way her voice softened when she spoke about a client who had finally told the truth to the right person. She looked at me sideways. "You should teach," she said. "Something simple. Something that lets people hold a pen and touch their own story without apology." I told her I would think about it. The ocean threw light at our feet, as if the day wanted proof. The first class happened a month later, in a borrowed library room that smelled like paper and possibility. 6 women, different ages, same quiet urgency. We sat in a circle with cheap pens and time. I told them no one would fix them here, and no one would judge them either. We began with 10 minutes of writing to a single sentence. Tell the truth, and let it be average. The words came slow at first, then faster. A retired nurse wrote about the day she stopped answering her brother's midnight calls. A young mother wrote about love that felt like a room too small for both of them. A woman with ink on her knuckles wrote about the years she kept her father's tools in a box she never opened. At the end, we read aloud. Not everything, just the parts that shook our hands. I did not give them advice. I gave them a rule. Your voice belongs to you even when it trembles. Afterward, one of them lingered. She wore a sweater with the elbows patched and eyes that had learned both defiance and care. She said she had not written anything since high school. She asked what changed for me. I told her nothing and everything. My heart stumbled, I said. Then my feet learned a new way to stand. She laughed in a way that sounded like relief and told me she would come back next week. When she left, I sat alone and wrote her a note I would never send. Keep the pen. It knows where you are going. At home, I learned the rhythms of the cottage. Morning light slid across the table at the same angle each day. The kettle sang one soft note before the boil. Gulls argued on the roof with the confidence of kings. I kept flowers on the sill and a bowl of lemons on the counter and a stack of books that did not demand more than I had to give. In the afternoons, I walked the cliff path and counted breaths instead of thoughts. The wind pulled my hair out of its decisions, and I let it. Ethan did not call for weeks. Letters arrived with official stamps and went where they needed to go. A single text came from an unknown number that said, "We are solvent," and I answered with one word. Good. Some nights I felt the ache of habit, the old pull to check his shadow and measure my worth by its weather. I let that ache sit in a chair by the door until it got bored and left. Loneliness visited too, but it did not scare me anymore. I had learned the difference between being alone and being erased. One morning, a volunteer coordinator from the community center visited the class and asked if I would do a workshop for the older group on Thursdays. The room filled with faces that had lived more than mine. We wrote about first jobs and last apologies and the taste of a particular soup that only one grandmother could make right. A white-haired man read 3 sentences about a bridge he used to cross on his way to work, and we all sat in a silence that felt holy. When it ended, he smiled at me, as if I had handed him back something he thought the river had taken. On the way home, I stopped at a tiny bookshop with a bell on the door, and a proprietor who knew exactly how to recommend without showing off. I asked for a notebook that could forgive mistakes, and he set a stack of them on the counter like a magician producing doves. I told him I taught a small class. He asked if we needed a place to read one evening. I said yes, before I knew I was allowed to want it. The date went on the calendar. The calendar felt like a hand I did not have to hold to cross a street. At night, I wrote in long lines that did not try to be clever. The memoir began to take its own shape. I did not dramatize what did not need it. I wrote the hospital with its clean humming lights. I wrote the call that did not come. I wrote the day I closed the accounts and the day I opened the door to the sea. When I reached the chapter where Helena brought me the folder with my house saved by a sentence in my son's handwriting, I stopped and let the page rest. That chapter asked for a particular kind of mercy, not for him, for me, to tell the whole truth, without turning it into a weapon I would later mistake for a shield. The auditors sent one final letter that said what letters in their language say when they are finished with you. No further action at this time. I placed it in the drawer with the trust papers and the small receipts of a life moved from one column to another. Then I took a walk down to the water at dusk and watched the horizon do its evening work, that slow erasing of hard edges. A child chased foam and fell and laughed, and a woman called his name with a voice that had practiced joy and warning in equal measure. I closed my eyes and thanked whatever listens for giving me back a place inside my own name. That weekend, I hosted the women in my class for tea. We sat at my small table and drank from mismatched cups and talked about sentences we were brave enough to write. When the sun began to slide away, one of them asked if I missed the city. I said sometimes. Then I told them the truth that had taken too long to learn. I do not miss who I was there. After they left, the cottage felt warm in the way houses do when voices linger in the air like threads. I washed the cups and put them on a towel to dry. The last light caught in the water and made tiny rivers on the counter. I wiped them with the back of my wrist and thought about the word future as if it were a room I could paint. Not new, not perfect, just mine. Near midnight, when the wind shifted and the house made that friendly, settling sound that tells you wood remembers its own grain, I opened the navy notebook and wrote 3 lines at the top of a clean page. I returned what did not belong to me. I kept what did. Tomorrow I will open the door to whatever knocks with a true name. I closed the book and set it beside the window where the moon could read it if she wanted to. Sleep came easily. No dreams tonight, only the slow tide and the promise of morning. In the morning, a small envelope would appear at my gate with familiar handwriting and a stamp, not from the city but from a town 2 hours inland. But I did not know that yet. I only knew the sound of gulls, the smell of salt, and the way my heart kept time with a world that finally matched its pace. The envelope lay where the morning wind had left it, tipped against the gate, like a small traveler that had reached the end of its journey and decided to rest. I found it after my walk, when the sun was still low and the shadows were kind. My name was written in a hand I knew too well, not the careless rush he used on contracts, the careful script he had in school when he wanted his teachers to like him. I carried it inside and set it on the table. I made tea and waited for the kettle to sing. I did not hurry. I let my hands learn the quiet before I taught my eyes the contents. When I opened it, a single card slid into my palm. There was no company logo, no embossed promise of success, just thick paper and ink. I read the first line aloud without meaning to. For the first time, I am earning my own way. The words loosened something in me. I had kept tied for so long I had forgotten the knot. I sat down. The house listened with me. He wrote about a room over a hardware store in a town I had never visited. He said the walls were thin but the rent was honest. He said he was working nights at a diner and mornings at a warehouse while waiting for the clerks at the courthouse to stamp the paperwork that would let him reopen a small consultancy under his own name with no borrowed shine. He wrote about numbers he had begun to understand because they were finally his. He wrote about the weight of a paycheck earned without help and the way it startled him to feel pride that did not demand an audience. He wrote about a man named Alvarez who ran the loading dock and who had a niece in a clinic that could not always accept uninsured patients. He wrote that the Rose Fund now had a different shape. No shell accounts, no tricks. Every week, he sent a small amount from a real bank with his real name to a real ledger that paid for rides and prescriptions and one winter coat. He wrote that he had finally understood what generosity costs when it does not expect interest. He did not ask for anything. He did not apologize again. He did not argue with the past. He recorded it. He let it stand. At the bottom, in smaller letters, he had added one more line: "Thank you for setting me free." I placed the card on the table and covered it with my hand. Warm paper under a warm palm. For a moment the kitchen was both the present and every kitchen we had ever shared. The high chair with spoon clatter, the teenager with cereal at midnight, the glossy college brochure open beside my coffee, the man with his practiced smile and a phone that glowed banquets and launches while my pulse negotiated with machines. I did not try to braid the timelines. I let them lie beside each other and tell the truth they knew. I walked to the window and watched the path along the cliff fill with light. 2 children ran past, arguing about the right way to fly a kite. Their mother laughed and told them, "The wind will teach you." I smiled at the accuracy. Wind is indifferent and generous at once. It offers you everything and nothing and asks you to learn how to hold a string. I returned to the table and turned the card over. On the back, he had written an address and a small request: "If you want to write, send it here. If you want to wait, I will keep writing anyway." I read that twice. Then I stood and took my navy notebook from the shelf. I opened to a new page and wrote the date. I described the envelope and the way it leaned, the way a person leans when he has learned patience. I copied the line about earning his own way. I wrote that I felt the ache of love without the need to fix. I wrote that mercy tastes different when it is not purchased with silence. I wrote that I could be proud of a man who had finally made room for consequences and for grace at the same table. I did not write back that day. I let my response take the shape of time. I cooked lentil soup and shared it later with the Thursday class. We read a paragraph each under the hanging lamp in the library room, and when the bell on the shop door chimed, the proprietor brought us tea and pretended he did not hear anyone cry. After the room emptied, I stayed to wipe the table and stack the chairs the way I used to straighten desks after last period. Order as a kindness, not a control. On the walk home, the sky wore that soft steel color that holds rain and restraint in the same breath. I passed the post office and stood in the doorway for a minute, just to smell the ink and boxes and the faint sweetness of tape. I could have mailed a card then. I chose not to. I wanted my answer to come from a place that had learned not to hurry, just to prove it still cared. Days gathered. The cottage learned me the way houses do when you keep faith with them. I painted the small shelf by the window, a pale blue that looked like morning even at dusk. I planted thyme and rosemary in pots, and a neighbor girl with a nose smudge asked if she could water them when I was away. I told her she could water them even when I was home, because plants like more than one person. She smiled and took the job with a solemnity that made the herbs stand straighter. Letters came from other places. A woman from class moved out of the guest room she had been renting from a cousin who liked to raise his voice. She sent a note with a pressed leaf and 3 words that made my chest lift: "I did it." A man sent a postcard from a bridge with the same name as the one he had written about. He said he walked across it and counted the bolts and did not fall. The world kept sending proofs of small bravery the way the tide keeps sending foam. On a Tuesday, I visited the community center and taught a new exercise. Write a letter you will not send. Address it to a person or a part of yourself. Halfway through, pencils paused in the air, then they moved again. When the pages were folded and tucked into envelopes for safekeeping, a woman with steady hands asked what I would do with my letter. I told her I would write 2, one to the mother I was, one to the son I have. She nodded at the symmetry. That night I finally sat down at the kitchen table and opened a fresh sheet of paper. I did not reach for flourishes. I let the truth speak without costume. I told him the cottage was small enough to hear the kettle from every room. I told him the ocean looked like work and rest in equal measure. I told him the Thursday class had grown and that the library wanted to host a reading next month. I told him I had learned how to mend cuffs without tugging the thread. I told him I had read his card until the ink felt memorized by my skin and that I had placed it in the drawer beside the trust papers as if it were a new kind of deed. I did not offer money. I did not offer solutions. I wrote a single promise at the end. I will not carry you. I will walk beside you when you are carrying yourself. I signed my name and sealed the envelope before I could add the apologies old habit still tried to sell me. In the morning, I took it to the post office and set it on the counter between a parcel with a toy inside and an elderly couple addressing invitations with careful joy. The clerk stamped my letter and slid it into the bright red mouth that eats distance for breakfast. When I stepped back into the light, a wind lifted the hair at my temples, and I let it. Weeks turned, and so did we. A second card arrived from the address over the hardware store. He had been promoted at the warehouse, and the diner kept him one night less. He wrote that he had sold the watch. He did not name it. He did not need to. He said he had paid a debt and kept only the memory of the ticking. He enclosed a photograph of a window box he had built and planted with herbs that looked suspiciously like mine. On the back he had written 2 words, "Your instructions." I smiled and put the photo on the shelf by the pale blue paint. The cottage approved. The Time nodded. On the night of the reading, the library filled with women and men who sometimes forget they are allowed to be both gentle and true. We read without microphones. We clap the way you clap for a bird that has landed in your open hand and decided to stay a minute. At the end, the proprietor closed the register and leaned in the doorway with his arms folded like a guardian saint of paper. Someone asked me to read from my own pages. I chose a short section about a spoon hitting a kitchen floor and a woman who decided not to pick it up until she could do it for herself. The room was still by the last sentence the way lakes are still before a fish surfaces. When the quiet let go, it did not shatter. It dissolved. Afterward, I walked home under a sky so clear the moon looked carved. I made tea and opened the Navy notebook and wrote a final line for the day. I am not healed. I am honest. It is enough. The next morning I woke early and stood at the gate again. No envelope waited there, only the faint print of a gull and the smell of salt. I went inside and wrote anyway. This was the plot twist no one advertises, because it is not loud. Redemption is not a rescue, it is a routine. I sat at the table and began the next chapter of the memoir. The words moved without force. When I looked up, the light had shifted into the shape it always makes at this hour, the shape my house and I have agreed upon. I thought of the letter in a room above a hardware store, finding a man who sits up straighter when he reads it and then finishes his shift with a little more care. I thought of the roses that would open when the weather allowed, and of the girl with the nose smudge who had learned exactly how much water is enough. I whispered, "Thank you" to the kettle when it sang, and carried my cup to the window. The ocean kept doing its patient work. Somewhere on a road between where I had been and where I had gone, a younger version of me walked without a map to a door she did not know she could open. I did not tell her the ending. I only told her to keep knocking, and when the wind came through the rosemary and set it speaking, I listened as if it were reading a letter written in a language I finally understood.